The ocean doesn't have a bottom at night. It's just a hungry, black lung breathing against the side of the ship. I stood on the balcony of Suite 702, feeling the MS Celestial vibrate beneath my feet. A $500 million piece of steel trying to convince me I was safe. But out here, 300 miles from the nearest coastline, safety is an illusion sold in the gift shop. The wind was biting, tasting of salt and expensive fuel. I looked down at the white foam being churned up by the propellers, a bioluminescent glow flickering in the wake like dying stars. I remember thinking how easy it would be, not to jump, I wasn't that person, but to simply cease to exist. In London, I was Rebecca Thorne, the senior architect. I had deadlines, a mortgage, a mother who called every Sunday at 10 a.m. But here, between the sky and the abyss, I was just a room number. I stepped back inside and slid the heavy glass door shut. The click of the lock sounded final. The room was too quiet. The air conditioning hum a low, synthetic growl. I moved the vanity, catching my reflection. I looked tired. The promotion had taken everything out of me, and this cruise was supposed to be the recharge. I reached for my necklace, the gold my father gave me before he passed, and unhooked it. That's when I heard it. Not a knock, a friction, the sound of a magnetic strip sliding through a reader. Shatik. My heart didn't race. It stopped. I stared at the heavy oak door of my cabin. The little LED light above the handle, usually a steady red, was blinking green. The door didn't open. Not yet. Whoever was on the other side was waiting. They knew I was standing there. They knew I could hear my own breathing. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, but the shadows in the corner of the room seemed to move first. I wasn't alone. I had never been alone. The buffet on the MS Celestial is a sensory assault. The smell of maple syrup, the clinking of champagne flutes, the forced cheerfulness of the washy-washy crew. I sat at our usual table by the window, the one Rebecca picked because it had the best view of the horizon. She's late, I whispered to my coffee. Rebecca was never late. She was a woman who lived by the Swiss movement of her watch. 9 a.m. came and went. 9:30 a.m. The pancakes on her plate turned cold and rubbery. I walked to deck 7, my heels clicking on the polished wood. I felt a strange vibration in my chest, a maternal instinct that felt like a cold finger tracing my spine. I knocked on 702. Becca? Honey, the excursion leaves in 20 minutes. Silence. I knocked harder. A passing steward, a young girl with name tag that read Maria, gave me a tight, professional smile. Everything okay, ma'am? My daughter isn't answering. She might have overslept. Maria used her key. She did it casually, the way someone opens a cupboard. But when the door swung wide, the atmosphere changed. The room was perfect, too perfect. The bed was made with military precision, but Rebecca always tore the sheets off the corners in her sleep. Her phone was on a nightstand, plugged into the charger. The screen dark. Her shoes were tucked under the chair. She's at the gym, Maria said, though her voice lacked conviction. Her phone is here, I said, my voice rising, cracking the vacation veneer. Rebecca doesn't go to the bathroom without her phone. Where's my daughter? I looked at the balcony door. It was locked from the inside. The room was a sealed box. My daughter was gone, and the only way out was through a door that required a code she never gave anyone. I've been in maritime security for 20 years. I've seen drunk CEOs fall off railings. I've seen jewelry heists that would make Hollywood jealous, and I've seen the way the ocean swallows evidence. But I had never seen a ghost until the morning Elena Thorne walked into my office. I pulled up the CCTV logs for Deck 7. The MS Celestial is a panopticon. We have 642 cameras. You can't sneeze on this ship without it being recorded in 4K. Show me the 2 a.m. feed for the aft corridor, I told my technician. We watched. At 2:10 a.m., Rebecca Thorne appears. She looks normal. She's wearing a gray silk slip dress and carrying her heels. She walks toward her room. She's 10 feet away from her door. She turns a corner where the maintenance closet creates a small, 3-foot blind spot. Wait, I said. Rewind. We watched it again. She walks into the blind spot. She never comes out. We waited. 10 minutes. 20. An hour. The hallway remained empty until the cleaning crew arrived at 5 a.m. Check the cameras on the other side of the corner. I ordered. "Sir, that's the problem," the technician whispered. "Look at the timestamp." I leaned in. The clock on the monitor showed 2 hours, 14 minutes, and 3 seconds. Then it jumped. It didn't flicker. It didn't glitch. It simply leaped to 2 hours, 20 minutes, and 3 seconds. 6 minutes of footage had been surgically removed from the hard drive, not just from one camera, but from every camera on Deck 7. Someone hadn't just kidnapped a girl. They had kidnapped time itself. I remember the way she smelled. Lilies and something sharp like ozone. She was my last customer. The jazz lounge was emptying out. The saxophone player packing up his reed. The lights dimming to a deep, moody purple. "One more." I asked her. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "No, Tomas. I think I've had enough of everything for one night." She tipped me $20, too much for a single gin and tonic. She seemed distracted, like she was listening to a frequency I couldn't hear. She kept glancing at the entrance of the lounge, her fingers tapping a frantic rhythm on the mahogany bar. "Are you waiting for someone, Miss Thorne?" She froze. Her eyes met mine, and for a second, the mask slipped. I saw pure, unadulterated terror. "I think someone is waiting for me," she whispered. I should have walked her to her room. I should have called security then. But in this industry, you learn to mind your business. You assume it's a lover's quarrel or a bit of travel anxiety. I watched her walk out, but as the doors swung shut behind her, I saw a shadow move in the hallway. A man in a white crew tunic. He wasn't one of mine. He was too tall, his gait too heavy. I didn't tell the police about the man in the white tunic. Not at first, because when I looked into the staff directory the next morning, there was no one on the roster who matched that description. And the tunic he was wearing? It was the old style. The kind we stopped using 5 years ago. In 7 years of working the corridors of the MS Celestial, you learn to read the energy of a room before you even step inside. Cabin 702 didn't just feel empty. It felt hollow. It felt like a tooth that had been pulled, leaving a jagged, sensitive hole in the ship's architecture. When I first knocked at 9 a.m., I wasn't worried. Guests on these cruises drink too much, dance too late, and sleep through sunrise. I moved on to 704, then 706, the rhythmic thud of my cart, the only music in the hallway. But by noon, the Do Not Disturb sign on 702 started to look like a warning. I used my master key. The air that hit me was cold, colder than the rest of the ship. The thermostat was cranked down to its lowest setting, 62 degrees. Rebecca Thorne was a thin woman. She shouldn't have wanted a freezer. My eyes went straight to the bed. It was terrifyingly neat. On this ship, we are trained to make hospital corners so tight you could bounce a coin off them. These corners were tighter. Someone had remade this bed after Rebecca was gone, but they hadn't done it the way I do it. They had done it with a strange, clinical aggression. I walked toward the vanity. Her makeup was laid out in a perfect row. Lipstick, mascara, a bottle of perfume that cost more than my monthly salary. I leaned in, and that's when I saw it. A single, dark hair caught in the bristles of her hairbrush. It was too coarse to be hers. It was gray, wiry, and blunt cut. I looked toward the bathroom. The door was closed. On a cruise ship, you're always afraid of what's behind a closed door. Suicide is the secret passenger on every voyage. People come to the ocean to end things. I steeled myself, took a breath of that recycled, icy air, and pushed the door open. The bathroom was spotless. It smelled of heavy bleach, the industrial kind we keep in the locked lockers on Deck 1. We hadn't used that bleach on Deck 7 in weeks. Someone had scrubbed this room. They had scrubbed the life out of it. I looked into the drain of the shower. A tiny, glinting piece of gold was wedged in the silver grate. I reached down, my fingers trembling, and pulled it out. It was a link from a chain, a gold link that had been snapped with incredible force. From a bridge, the MS Celestial looks like a god's toy. I have 3,000 lives in the palm of my hand. I am responsible for their birthdays, their weddings, their safety, and, unfortunately, their tragedies. When Miller called me and said the words, Operation Bright Star. The coffee in my mug turned to lead. How long? I asked. 10 hours since the last sighting, Captain. We've done the first sweep. She's not in the public areas. I looked out at the horizon. We were in the middle of a transit. To the north, nothing but water. To the south, the same. If Rebecca Thorne went overboard 10 hours ago, she wasn't a missing person anymore. She was a coordinate, a ghost in the current. Status of the mob sensors? Silent, sir. No triggers. No alarms. The hull is clean. That was the impossible part. You don't just jump off a ship this size without the ship knowing. The MS Celestial is a living organism. It feels every impact. If a 130-pound woman hits the water, the bridge knows within seconds. I gave the order to turn the ship. It's a massive undertaking, a slow, agonizing art that cost the company $50,000 in fuel alone. But you can't leave a soul behind without a fight. As the ship groaned under the pressure of the turn, I looked at the digital manifest on my screen. Rebecca Thorne, architectural designer. No history of depression. No erratic behavior reported. Then, a second notification popped up. A priority message from the corporate office in Miami. They didn't ask about the girl. They didn't ask about the search. The message was simple. Maintain scheduled arrival time. Do not engage with local press at next port. Incident is to be classified as probable self-harm until further notice. They were already writing her off. They were already building the coffin of a narrative to protect the stock price. I looked at the radar, the green sweep of light searching for a needle in a liquid haystack, and I felt a deep, biting shame. We weren't a rescue vessel. We were a floating business. And a business has no room for a girl who vanishes into thin air. Let's talk about the physics. People think falling off a cruise ship is easy. It isn't. The MS Celestial is designed to keep you inside its steel skin at all costs. The railings on Deck 7 are 43 inches high, well above the center of gravity for the average woman. To go over, you have to make a conscious effort. You have to climb. I was brought in by the family 3 weeks later. The ship was already back at sea. Another batch of happy tourists drinking margaritas in the same spot where Rebecca was last seen. I stood in the blind spot on Deck 7 with a laser measure and a heavy heart. The MOB system is thermal-based. I explained to the family's lawyer. It looks for heat signatures. If a body falls, it's caught on a 24-hour loop of infrared cameras. But there's a flaw. Every system has a flaw. I pointed to the laundry chutes. They are large, circular openings that lead down to the processing plants on Deck 2. They are supposed to be locked. They are supposed to require a biometric scan from a crew member. But the seals on this ship were old. A person who knew the rhythm of the internal vacuum system could, theoretically, bypass the sensors. If Rebecca went through the chute, the mob sensors wouldn't have seen her. The ship wouldn't have felt her. She would have traveled through the veins of the vessel, bypassing the skin entirely. But there was another problem. The math of the CCTV. The footage was deleted, the lawyer said. Not just deleted. I corrected. It was looped. During those 6 minutes, the system was fed a pre-recorded image of an empty hallway. That takes more than just a technician. That takes someone with access to the mainframe. Someone who didn't just want her gone. They wanted her erased from the record. I looked at the railing, then back at the maintenance closet. The distance was exactly 12 feet. In 12 feet, Rebecca Thorne went from a living, breathing woman to a mathematical anomaly. I don't like people. I like data. Data doesn't lie. And data doesn't have a corporate agenda. When the chief told me to pull the log for the Deck 7 cameras, I expected a hardware failure, a short circuit, a salt air glitch. But what I found was a ghost. I went into the subdirectory of the server, the place where the system logs every handshake between the user and the software. At 2:12 a.m., a login occurred. It used the credentials of a security officer named Sarah Jenkins. "Hey, Chief," I called out. Where was Sarah Jenkins at 2:12 a.m.? Miller didn't even look up from his desk. On leave. She's been off the ship for 2 weeks. Her grandmother died. A cold sweat broke out across my shoulders. Then who just used her ID to access the Deck 7 video feed. I started digging deeper. This wasn't a hack from the outside. The signal came from inside the ship. Specifically, it came from an Ethernet port in the engine control room, a restricted area 3 decks below the waterline. I looked at the deleted file. It wasn't gone. It was just moved to a null folder. I tried to restore it. My screen flickered. A line of text appeared in the command prompt. Letters typing themselves out in a slow, rhythmic crawl. Stop looking. I froze. I'm an IT guy on a luxury liner. I don't sign up for horror movies. I tried to override the command, but my keyboard went dead. The mouse cursor began to move on its own, dragging the folder toward the trash icon. "Chief!" I yelled. Miller ran over, but by the time he reached my desk, the screen was black. A single word was burned into the center of the monitor in high-contrast white. Celestial, that was the name of the ship, but it was also something else. I realized then that the ship wasn't just a place. For someone on board, it was a weapon, and they were still using it. I've lived in the steel for 5 years. Most people think of a cruise ship as a hotel that floats. They see the gold leaf, the casinos, the theater lights. They don't see the interstitial spaces, the voids between the hull and the cabin walls, the crawl spaces where the pipes hum like living veins. To the 3,000 passengers on board, I am a ghost. To the ship, I am its true master. I wore the old white tunic, the one from the 2021 uniform revision. It's a cloak of invisibility. If you walk with a clipboard and a look of mild annoyance, people look right through you. I watched Rebecca Thorne for 3 days. I watched her read by the pool. I watched her eat alone. I watched the way she touched her gold necklace when she was nervous. She was perfect, an architect, someone who appreciated structure. I wanted to show her the real structure of the MS Celestial. At 2:12 a.m., I was already in the maintenance closet on Deck 7. I had the override key, a legacy master I'd skimmed from a retiring chief engineer years ago. I watched her on my handheld monitor, a grainier version of the beauty I saw in person. She turned the corner. She entered the blind spot I had spent months perfecting. I didn't need to struggle. I didn't need to make a sound. I stepped out, the shadow of the closet, reaching for her first. The look in her eyes wasn't just fear. It was the shock of a mathematical mind realizing the equation had failed. I pressed the cloth to her face, the sweet chemical scent of sevoflurane, and the world went dark for her. 12 seconds. That's all it took to move her into the service elevator. By the time the CCTV loop finished its 6-minute cycle, the hallway was empty again. The guests in 704 were snoring. The ocean was still churning. And Rebecca Thorne was no longer a guest. She was inventory. The cruise line tried to block me at the gangway. Jurisdictional issues, they said. International waters, they claimed. But the Thorne family is friends in high places, and by day 10, I was standing in Suite 702 with a kit of luminol and a sense of impending dread. "The room has been cleaned, detective," the security chief told me, his eyes tracking my every move. "Clean is a relative term," I replied. I shut the curtains and turned off the lights. The room plunged into a synthetic midnight. I began to spray. Luminol is a snitch. It finds what the human eye refuses to see. I sprayed the carpet. Nothing. I sprayed the bed. Clean. Then I turned toward the bathroom. I squeezed the trigger and the world turned neon blue. It wasn't a splash. It was a struggle. On the marble vanity, there were handprints, faint, glowing streaks where someone had gripped the edge so hard their DNA was practically pressed into the stone. But there were also voids, shapes in the blue glow that suggested something had been moved. Someone was dragged through here. I whispered. I knelt by the base of the toilet. There was a smear, a long, jagged line that led directly to the maintenance access panel behind the decorative tiling. I pulled at the tile. It was loose. Behind it wasn't just pipes. It was a vertical shaft, barely wide enough for a body, leading straight down into the darkness of the lower decks. "Chief," I said, looking up at Miller, "when was the last time this access shaft was inspected?" He didn't answer. He was looking at the blue glow on the floor, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine terror in his eyes. He wasn't afraid of what I'd found. He was afraid of who was watching us find it. They think they can bury it. They think the gray zone of the law is a shield, but the MS Celestial is a ship of secrets, and secrets eventually rot. I work in the communications array. I see the red level emails that never make it to the official logs. On March 15th, 6 hours after the Thorne girl was reported missing, an encrypted burst was sent from a bridge to a private server in the Cayman Islands. It wasn't about a search party. It was a liability assessment. The email contained a photo. It wasn't from the CCTV. It was a photo taken by a thermal camera in the incinerator room on Deck 2. It showed a heat signature, a human shape, curled inside an industrial waste bag. The timestamp was 4:45 a.m. The reply from the Caymans was 3 words: dispose and redact. I've watched the Thorne family on the news. I've seen the mother's face. Every time I see her, I think about that thermal image. I think about the smell of the incinerators that morning, a heavy, cloying scent that the ventilation system couldn't quite mask. We are told we are a family on this ship, but a family doesn't burn its guests to protect a quarterly dividend. I have the drive. I have the logs. But if I come forward, I don't just lose my job. I've seen what happens to people who break the vow of the sea. We have a morgue on board for a reason, and it isn't always for natural causes. You hear things at night when you're scraping the barnacles or checking the ballast tanks. The ship talks. It groans, it sighs, and sometimes it screams. On the 3rd night of the Thorne search, I was down in the double bottom, the space between the inner and outer hulls. It's a place no passenger ever sees. It's damp, loud, and smells of ancient rust. I was checking a seal on a pump when I heard it. Thump, thump, thump. It wasn't the engine. The engine has a rhythm. This was irregular. It was coming from the void space behind the freshwater tanks. Hello? I called out. My voice was swallowed by the machinery. I climbed the ladder to the inspection hatch. It was bolted from the outside. That's not protocol. Void spaces are never bolted from the outside. They're a safety hazard. I put my ear to the steel. I heard a voice. It was faint, a rasping whisper that sounded like it had been stripped of its vocal cords. Rebecca? I backed away so fast I nearly fell off the catwalk. I didn't tell my supervisor. On the MS Celestial, if you find something that shouldn't exist, you pretend you didn't see it. Because the people who live in the in-between don't like to be disturbed. And the ship likes to keep its inventory. The news of Rebecca Thorne hit me like a physical blow. I was sitting in my living room in Ohio, 600 miles from the nearest ocean. But suddenly I could smell the salt air again. I could feel the vibration of the MS Celestial through my floorboards. They called it a mystery. They called it unprecedented. They lied. 2 years ago, I was on that ship, Suite 710, just 4 doors down from where Rebecca vanished. It was the 3rd night of a Caribbean loop. I woke up at 3:15 a.m., not to a sound, but to a change in the air. The cabin felt heavy, pressurized. I looked toward the balcony door. It was locked. Then I looked toward the bathroom. The door was cracked open, a sliver of light from the nightlight spilling out. And there, standing in the gap, was a man. He was wearing a white crew tunic. He wasn't moving. He was just watching me breathe. He had a roll of silver industrial tape in one hand and a heavy, dark cloth in the other. I didn't scream, not at first. My lungs were frozen. When I finally found my voice and let out a jagged, glass-shattering shriek, he didn't run. He didn't panic. He stepped back into the bathroom and closed the door. By the time my husband woke up and kicked that bathroom door in, the room was empty, the windowless. Porcelain box was a dead end, but the maintenance hatch behind the toilet was hanging open by a single screw. The cruise line gave us a full refund. They gave us a premium diamond voucher for a future voyage. They told us it was a hallucination caused by a minor carbon monoxide leak. They made us sign a non-disclosure agreement before we left the gangway. I took the money because I was terrified, but seeing Rebecca's face on the screen, I realized the hallucination had a name, and it was still on board. They don't build ships for people. They build them for profit. Every square inch of the MS Celestial is optimized for revenue, except for the voids. I'm Rebecca's cousin. I spent 10 years in Special Branch before going private. When the family called, I didn't go to the cruise line. I went to the shipyards in St. Nazaire, where the Celestial was berthed. I spent $40,000 of the family's savings just to get my hands on the as-built structural blueprints. There's a gap, I told Elena, pointing to the cross-section of Deck 7. What kind of gap? Between the ceiling of Deck 6 and the floor of Deck 7, there's a 4-foot utility space. It carries the black water pipes and the electrical trunking. On the official guest maps, it doesn't exist. But on these schematics, there are access points. 7 of them, all located inside maintenance closets. I boarded the ship as a passenger 6 months after Rebecca vanished. I didn't go to the Lido deck. I didn't go to the casino. I waited until 4 a.m., slipped into the maintenance closet on Deck 7, and found the hatch. It wasn't locked. It was polished. Someone used this hatch every single day. I dropped into the darkness with a thermal scope and a silenced pistol. The smell was the first thing that hit me. A mix of hydraulic fluid, rotting food, and something unmistakably human. I crawled to a forest of pipes for 50 yards until the space opened up into a dead zone behind the main elevator bank. There was a nest, old blankets from the pool deck, half-eaten room service trays that had been cold for weeks, and pinned to the steel hull with industrial tape was a photo of Rebecca, not a social media photo, a candid, taken from the perspective of someone standing inside a closet, looking out through the slats. You call it a ship. I call it an organism. And every organism has parasites. I don't exist in your world of taxes and ID cards. I exist in the in-between. I know when the night watchman takes a smoke break on Deck 4. I know which floorboards creak and which security cameras have a 3-degree drift in high winds. Rebecca Thorne was an architect. She thought she understood how things were built. She thought walls were solid. She didn't realize that on a ship, walls are just suggestions. I watched her through the vents for 48 hours. I watched her talk to her mother. I watched her cry once, quietly, while looking at a photo of a man. Her father, I assumed. I didn't want to kill her. You don't kill the things you collect. I had her in the void space for 3 days. I fed her the finest steaks from the specialty restaurant, hand-delivered in the dark. I wanted her to see the ship through my eyes, the beauty of the machinery, the way the steel sings when the waves hit the bow at 20 knots. But she was weak. She didn't have the stomach for the steel. She kept talking about the sun and the air. She tried to scream into the ventilation ducts. I had to silence the music. When the search got too close, when that man with the blue spray started turning my world into a neon nightmare, I had to move the inventory. People think the ocean is the only way out. It's not. There are places in the engine room where the heat is so intense that bone turns to white powder in minutes. I watched the bright star search from the shadows of the bridge itself. I sat 3 feet away from Captain Halloway while he stared at his radar. He was looking for a body in the water. He never thought to look for the man sitting in the extra chair in the corner of his own room. The phone was a miracle, or a mistake. When Rebecca's iPhone 14 pinged a tower in Nassau, the cruise line's lawyers tried to claim it was a spoofing attack by hackers. But the serial number didn't lie. I spent 72 hours cracking the encryption on that device. Most of the data had been wiped, factory reset, but the flash memory of a modern smartphone is like a ghost. It remembers what it used to be. I recovered one file, a 4-second video clip recorded at 2:12 and 44 seconds a.m. It's dark. The camera is shaking. You can hear the sound of the ship's engines, that low, rhythmic thrum-thrum-thrum. Then a voice. It's Rebecca. She's whispering, her breath hitching in her throat. He's in the walls. He's been in the walls the whole time. The camera pans up. For a fraction of a second, the phone's autofocus locks onto something in the darkness of the open maintenance hatch. It's a face, but it's not a face you'd recognize as human. It's a mask made of gray duct tape, with 2 jagged holes cut for eyes. The video ends with the sound of the phone hitting the floor and a heavy metallic clink. I ran that clink through an acoustic analyzer. It wasn't a door closing. It was the sound of a magnetic master key being snapped in half. The person who took Rebecca didn't just have a key. They wanted to make sure she knew that, from that moment on, no key in the world could save her. In the boardroom of Aurelian Seas, the ocean is not a majestic wilderness. It is a column on a spreadsheet. My job as chief legal counsel was to ensure that column stayed black, not red. When the Thorne case landed on my mahogany desk, I didn't see a missing girl. I saw a $200 million dip in quarterly projections and a class action nightmare that could sink our flagship. We offer the standard compassion package. I told the board, $250,000, funeral costs covered, and a non-disclosure agreement that binds the family's bloodline for 3 generations. But Elena Thorne didn't want the money. She wanted the black box data from the MS Celestial's internal security server. Denied, I said in the deposition, my voice as cold as the AC in the room. Proprietary technology. Security protocols are trade secrets. Disclosing them would put every other passenger at risk of a hypothetical predator. I watched her across the table. She was breaking. She looked like a woman who had been hollowed out by the wind. My team of analysts had already scrubbed the social media profiles. We leaked stories to the tabloids about Rebecca's secret debt and a history of anxiety. We didn't need to prove she jumped. We just needed to make the public think she was the kind of person who would. But then came the ghost in the code. That technician, Leo, had found the login from Sarah Jenkins. We buried Leo, not in the ocean, but in a mountain of litigation. We sued him for breach of contract, seized his personal devices, and silenced him with a gag order that made him a prisoner in his own home. The sea is vast, but the legal system is a labyrinth. And in a labyrinth, the person with the map always wins. We didn't care if a monster was living in the walls of our ship. We cared that the stock price stayed at $84.50. I retired 6 months after Rebecca vanished. I couldn't look at the MS Celestial anymore without seeing a tombstone. I moved to a small cabin in the woods, far from the sound of the tide, but the ghost ship followed me. I started a database. I called it the vertical vanishing. It's not just the Thorne girl. Since the year 2000, 423 people have vanished from cruise ships. 80% are ruled suicides. 15% are accidental falls. But the remaining 5%, they follow a pattern so precise it's chilling. The victims are always alone. They are always between the ages of 25 and 40. And they always vanish within 20 feet of a maintenance closet. I've interviewed former crew members, men and women who spent 30 years in the guts of these ships. They speak of the permanent residents. Men who board with fake IDs, find a way into the void spaces, and simply stay. They live off the surplus of the buffets. They move between sister ships when they are docked side by side in Cozumel or Nassau. They're not ghosts, Miller. One old engineer told me over a bottle of cheap rum. They're stowaways who never left. The ships are so big now, you could hide an army in the HVAC system, and the captain wouldn't know until they started voting. Rebecca Thorne wasn't a tragedy. She was a harvest. She was a 424th entry in a ledger that the world refuses to acknowledge. Because if the world acknowledged it, the cruise industry, a $40 billion empire, would collapse overnight. Suite 702 is beautiful now. It has new smart glass on the balcony that frosts over at the touch of a button. It has a voice-activated assistant that can dim the lights or order you a midnight snack. It has a new number, 2, Suite 801, but the maintenance hatch is still there. The new guests are a young couple on their honeymoon. They laugh. They make love. They take selfies on the balcony and tag them #OceanBliss. They have no idea that 3 inches behind their headboard, there's a vertical shaft that drops 60 feet into the dark. They don't hear the scratching. They think it's the ship settling or the expansion of the steel in the tropical heat. They don't notice that their toothpaste moves half an inch on the vanity while they're at dinner. They don't realize that the steward who turned down their bed tonight had a slightly different gait than the one they saw this morning. The MS Celestial is currently 200 miles off the coast of Bermuda. The moon is full, casting a silver path across the waves. It's the perfect night for a stroll, the perfect night for a final photo. In the engine room, the heat is rising. The incinerators are being prepped for the morning waste cycle. The resident is sitting in the dark, his gray duct tape mask resting on his knees. He's looking at a new photo, A photo of the honeymooners. He likes the way they smile. He thinks they'll look even better in the in-between. We tell ourselves stories to stay safe. We tell ourselves that doors locked, that cameras watch, and that the ocean is a barrier. But the case of Rebecca Thorne proves that the most dangerous place in the world isn't the wilderness. It's the place that was built to keep the wilderness out. Rebecca's mother still waits. Every Sunday at 10 a.m., she calls a phone that has been at the bottom of a Bahamian evidence locker for years. She listens to the voicemail. "Hi, it's Becca. Leave a message after the beep." She leaves a message every time. "Becca, honey, if you can hear me, just tell me if you're in the water or the wind. I just need to know where to look." But the answer isn't in the water, and it isn't in the wind. It's in the static of a looped security tape. It's in the null folder of a bleach server. It's in the silent scream of a girl who realized that on a ship of 3,000 people, she was the only one who was truly alone. The MS Celestial is a masterpiece of engineering. It's a city of light in a void of darkness. But remember, the bigger the light, the deeper the shadow. And in the shadows of the sea, the inventory is never quite finished. Next time you're on a cruise and you hear a sound behind the walls at 3 a.m., don't go to the door. Don't look in the mirror. And whatever you do, don't look at the maintenance closet, because impossible disappearance is only impossible until it happens to you.